What is up, Baton Rouge? Welcome back to the Tiger Pride podcast presented by 225 Magazine. I'm Mark Clements here as always with Jared Roser of TigerDetails.com, coming to you again from his nice red wall. I'm approaching, you can see the shirt, I'm approaching vacation mode here. I got a beach trip planned for this weekend, so I'm just rocking a different florally beachy shirt every day of the week and in the hype build up, heading out to South Carolina for a nice little beach trip. So how's your week been, buddy?
I got a blue T-shirt. I think it's Gap. Just a blue T-shirt Tuesday. It's been chill. Trying to take care of a variety of things. Just getting ready for. Again, we get closer and closer to a real life football season. We've got some college games that kicked off this past weekend. I had a chance to watch some LSU commits playing their high school ball in other states, and now we're getting closer and closer to SEC ball and LHSAA ball.
These early games are so weird to watch with the no fans and watching these guys play, and it just makes me picture Tiger Stadium with, I guess we're still yet to be seen how many people will be in there officially, but Coach O talked about that on his press conference today. What's just kind of your expectations for watching an empty Tiger Stadium full, LSU? Let's theoretically say they get to the Bama game and you're watching LSU Bama in mid-November or early November with no one there.
Yeah, it's going to be a weird crossover between a video game and a spring game sort of thing. That's watching the NBA bubble. That's how I felt about a lot of those games, as though I was watching a video game being played. And I think there's going to be a certain aspect of that, I guess, if you're watching on television, but if you're there in person, looking at 25,000 people in that stadium is probably the ballpark that we're looking at compared to the typical 102,000. And so Coach O has talked a lot this preseason about the team having to create its own energy, and he feels good about the way that they've been able to do that in some practices and obviously the scrimmage this past week. But as he told us a couple of hours ago, and as I don't think anyone really needed to be told, it's never going to be what they're used to on a Saturday in Tiger Stadium.
Yeah, you can't replicate that. The one thought that I have on it is the one thing, I guess Coach O proved a lot of people wrong last year with the season he put together. But even before that, the one thing that everyone said he had going for him, the one big compliment was he can get his guys to play. He's the hype man of the team. So, you got to think they feel pretty good about if anybody can get a team fired up to go take the field. Coach O's probably your guy.
Look, you put enough metal chairs around Tommy Moffitt and that strength and conditioning crew, they're going to, between the amount of energy drinks that O and the strength staff is going to down on any given morning, and then whatever the heck's going to happen to all these chairs as the game approaches, they'll be ready to play some SEC ball.
Yeah, some of these Tommy Moffitt stories are fantastic. A few other things Coach O covered in the scrimmage, and then we got to get into our very, very rough offensive predictions for the year. We were joking before we started recording this that we're already pretty far off in our predictions. Now we're having to do math and divide it by games, and it's just going to be a mess. But a few more things Coach O touched on today. They had the first scrimmage. They said the defense played pretty well and had a lot of sacks. The names keep getting brought up. Arik Gilbert played really well, 2 touchdowns, and he mentioned Kayshon Boutte as one of the standouts among the receivers. Those 2 names have got to be pretty exciting for people, especially 2 true freshmen, 2 5-stars, highly recruited, to see them come in and be kind of the next big thing. Exciting news to be heard from Coach O.
Yeah, no doubt. The story that I was working on last week, and it's going to go live this afternoon, about the amount of turnover that LSU is facing that I mentioned last week. It's the most in at least 20 years that a team has faced, means a lot of early opportunities for younger, less experienced guys. And the good news for the Tigers is a lot of those young, less experienced guys for them are extremely talented. And we talked a little bit about just having to learn on the fly and step up earlier. And, they say throw you into the fire and all those things. Those are 2 guys. And we've talked a little bit in the past about Coy Moore. So those are 3 guys that as true freshmen I anticipate playing major roles. Coy and Kayshawn bring a little bit of kind of a different look from one another to those wide receiver positions. Kayshawn's a guy that at Westgate burst onto the scene as just a really fast weapon that if you can get the ball to him, he is going to go a long way. And he's really worked the last few years to kind of round out his game. And you've heard such great reception of how that's gone throughout camp that it looks like he might be right now with Coy out, the third wide receiver, and that you're looking at Terrace Marshall Jr., Racing McMath, and now Kayshawn bringing some of those aspects of his game into the starting lineup. Arik's a guy that I think from the first day of camp, everyone was already talking about and looking at as the starting tight end because of everything he brings to the table. And watching Jacoby Stevens talk about what it's like to try and cover a guy his size running his speed is really encouraging to know that a guy that during his recruitment was labeled as a bit of a freak athlete, and Jacoby is now a senior and talking about how difficult it is going to be to cover Gilbert. That's really encouraging. And then obviously Coy, when he's back healthy, is a guy that comes to college as about as polished of a wide receiver coming out of high school as you can be. Certainly a very physically gifted wide receiver in his own right, but really is just so on top of the mental and technical side of the game at such an early stage in his career. And so at the wide receiver position, and I mean the pass catching weapons that are going to be there for Myles Brennan, a lot to work with, even with Jamar Chase and some of those older guys gone.
Yeah, I mean that's some really exciting names, and I think they all have, like you mentioned, a few different skill sets. You know, Terrace is a little bit of a bigger guy, a good target man. I think Racy's kind of got that little middle ground. He's got some speed to him, but definitely also very well built. I keep seeing these pictures of Arik Gilbert from scrimmages, and he just doesn't look anything like an 18, 19-year-old freshman coming in. He's going to be a freak. And then you mentioned Keishon Butte's speed, and Coy Moore and his route running is ahead of where most freshmen are. It's an exciting group, and we talked about it last week as well. As you know, not to diminish the fact of losing Jamar Chase and how big of an impact that's going to be, but you do have a lot of talent there. And especially when you look at, let's just say, just for this example, that Arik Gilbert is their fourth receiver as a tight end out there. You mentioned Jacoby trying to cover him. It's going to be mismatch nightmares all over the field for whoever's trying to cover these receivers, and it'll be up to the coaching staff to kind of get those guys open and then Myles to find them. But they did a lot of that last year, making those mismatches and getting guys open, and if they can do a lot of the same, that could be an exciting offense, which is kind of where we're gonna roll into right now, and sort of attempt to put predictions and put some numbers on these guys, but it's all kind of a coin flip. So we'll start with quarterback, and for some of these, we want to do like a general depth chart, who we think kind of emerges. Obviously, I think we both are going to Myles Brennan's the guy, and I don't know who you think might be his backup. You think it'd be more Finley or Max Johnson? Any idea who might have the slight edge for the backup role?
I'm certainly interested to see how that plays out, and wouldn't be surprised to see each of them get some opportunities through the course of this season, particularly with, the way the redshirt rule had developed, and then now with the additional year of eligibility anyway for all players this fall. Coming in, I wondered if Max might be the lead guy for that number 2, but at the moment, I might lean TJ just based on, again, we haven't had a chance to see very much because we're all kept away from COVID, but just kind of hearing some of what and some of the folks over there have had to say about the quarterbacks. For whatever reason, I kind of lean a little bit more TJ if I was forced to make a bet one way or the other.
That'd be another little interesting thing to watch. Like you mentioned, the redshirt rule, if they don't give maybe each of them a spot at the backup and get 4 games here, 4 games there, and let them kind of, still maintain that redshirt. We'll see. That'll be interesting. So we were both going through some of the stats of previous years to kind of get a general ballpark and where we put Brennan for this year. And just as a quick recap, not that many have forgotten last year, but Joe Burrow was 402 out of 527 attempted passes. That's 76.3%. Jeez. threw for 5,561 yards, 60 touchdowns, and 6 INTs. So that obviously remarkable, Heisman, record-breaking, all that. In 2018, after that season, everyone thought the offense was pretty good. You felt okay about Joe throwing the ball. The receivers looked pretty good, and you were happy to get out of the old school ways of Les Miles. Keep in mind those numbers I just read to you from 2019. 2018, Joe Burrow was 219 of 379 for 57.8%. He threw for 2,894 yards, 16 touchdowns versus 60, and 5 INTs to his 6. So,
obviously they played a couple more games in 2019,
right.
But he completed 23 more passes than he had attempted the year before, and that's not all a matter of those 2 games. He completed almost 20% higher. He threw 44 more touchdowns and more. They were slinging it last year, and as we joked about before we started this, looking back at that 2018 season compared to 2019, or going even farther and seeing seasons 2017 and before where we were talking about, man, that receiver's really come along and found his role in this offense. And then you look at their season stats, and it's like it's Jamar Chase on a Saturday in Nashville is that guy's season a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, when we get to the receivers, I got a few more numbers that they're out there that kind of reiterates that. So before we get to the actual numbers, I guess I feel like we're kind of in the same boat, and that I think Myles Brennan, let's pretend he had a full season like Joe had for 2 years. I think he would probably fall somewhere in the middle of those 2 numbers, probably closer to, I want to say like closer to the 2018 like averages, but like still a good bump up. It's doing anything close to what Joe did last year is just inconceivable. And but I do think it'll be a step above where 2018 was. If he can keep that completion percentage a little bit higher, but like closer to 60%, get over that hump a little bit, I think LSU's in good hands, and obviously limiting the turnovers. Do you have the same general outlook on Myles this season with this new offense and him being here for a while?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at raw numbers, no knock on Myles, but if you gave Myles 20 games, I don't know that he's doing what Joe did in 2019. And so with only half that and an all-SEC schedule and all of those things, I certainly don't anticipate him being close to net totals of what we saw last year. I think per game wise, you're still looking at much closer to that 2018 season. The year that we just watched unfold a few months ago was just that special of a year. But I do look, you mentioned the completion percentage is someplace where my eyes are heavily on Myles. He's been right in that range in his limited opportunities, right around 60%. And I think I look for him to be a little bit above that. And if so, and if he's able to limit those interceptions, that's kind of what I'm looking for from him, is to be a little bit better of a completion percentage than what we saw from Joe and Joe's first year on limited preseason opportunities compared to Myles has been prepping for this for 3 years now. You just want to see Myles be efficient and limit mistakes, and hopefully, have that interception number be low enough to where it's not too far off of where Joe was the last couple of years. And the touchdowns will certainly be nowhere near 60, but hopefully that a little north of that 16 2 years ago too, to where you're maybe up there around 20 or into the 20s and still single-digit interceptions.
Yeah, and it's harder to kind of put numbers because I'm kind of thinking about this like on average per game and then just multiplying by 10. That's kind of the ballpark of where I'm sitting at. So I guess I'll go first from Myles. I think about what you said. For a lot of this general area, what we both said, I'm putting him in the about 62 to 65% completion. I have 2,500 yards. It's just SEC slate. I got some of these games in the past, they would get boosted up by the little cupcake games. They're not going to have any of those. So I wonder if I'm like overplaying it a little bit. So it's, again, this is all really hard and weird to try and predict. I'll say the ballpark of 2,500 yards, right at 20 touchdowns, and I think 4 INTs is where I'll book it.
And And one thing we haven't mentioned yet in terms of the difficulty of forecasting these numbers is you don't wish it on anyone, but who knows if a guy has to miss a game or two with COVID, or if the team has to potentially miss a game with COVID.
Yeah.
We've seen this TCU SMU game next week, or in a couple of days now, is already postponed, if not canceled, if they can't work it in later on in the season. And so it's going to be a really crazy year to try and forecast from a number standpoint. But if Myles has 10 games, which, knock on wood, hope for his and everyone else's sake is the case, I think I'm pretty similar to what you're saying in terms of around the mid 60% range, the lower to mid 62 to 64, 65%, somewhere in there, and hopefully pushing up toward 2,500 yards. I think if I have to go lower or higher, I probably lean lower right now for a variety of reasons, whether that be, some rough games against some SEC defenses, or maybe they get away from a Vandy or a Missouri and they want to get more extended looks at those true freshmen. So I kind of shy away from the 2,500 mark. And then in terms of touchdowns and interceptions, I think I look kind of high teens or up around 20, maybe 18 to 20 touchdowns, and interceptions being somewhere around 7 or 8. So certainly I'm on the higher side of interceptions than you are, but again, we'll see. It's a mess to try and get ready for and to try and forecast.
Yeah, it really is. And I think kind of playing along also with the, you mentioned you don't want anyone to get COVID. And it would also, I guess, will yet to be seen, but in other sports that have started up, just given the overall shorter and more compact training and off-season build-up to the season, a lot of injuries have been higher. So you hope that, that's not going to carry over to college football as well. I guess the once-a-week games help a little bit because I know, again, when I watch soccer, they're playing 2 games a week, if not more, and running around for 90-something minutes. So injuries have just been higher. You hope it doesn't carry over into college football, but it's also just kind of like that overall fitness thing. You just don't know how that's going to play out throughout the season. And then kind of leading into the next position, I also wonder if they're going to rely a little more on the running game, considering they've got 3 for sure and possibly 4 guys that they feel pretty confident in at running back. And this might be the most difficult part to piece together because really the top 3 guys, you could all make a good solid case that they're the starter, that they're the guy. A lot of different skill sets in there too with John Emery, Ty Davis-Price, and Chris Curry. And then you have Trey Bradford, the true freshman, who is Coach O has also spoken highly of. So I guess just for starters, when you try to shake that position out and see who's going to wind up on top, is that going to be one of those things that maybe every week, depending on who the opponent is, how they're playing, we may see a new starter every couple of weeks, something like that? Or do you think one guy's going to kind of emerge and be the front runner of that little group? How do you see that position playing out?
Yeah, I think that they go into this season with all 3 of the returning players kind of continuing to battle for prominence in what is going to be kind of a committee approach. Surprised if we see one of them at some point early on kind of separate himself a little bit. I know we've had some years past where we go into the year expecting LSU to have that committee type approach, and then at some point that distance just creeps up. Even a couple of years ago, I think we went into that year not realizing how much Brissett was going to distance himself from even, a great year as the second fiddle in Clyde. It just kind of built up over the course of the year and broke away and turned into a 1,000-yard campaign by Nick. So I kind of go in thinking that Chris Curry is leading that charge, but that it's a very close race between those 3. I think it's going to be fun to watch Trey Bradford get involved when he has the opportunity to do so, but I do think that I view him as being a little bit further behind as a guy coming straight out of high school and some of the difficulty of working your way into a running back rotation beyond just being a talented runner. but some of the pass pro aspects of it and all of those things as well. I think he's just going to kind of have his little opportunities. And I don't look at it as necessarily a complete 4-back equal pecking order sort of thing. But those other three, I have a difficult time because I think Emory has all the potential in the world, but was the guy that didn't live up to it as much last year. And so you wonder if he had that breakthrough, praised him more today than maybe we've heard from him ever. And so if he's got things going and clicking, could he suddenly leapfrog those other guys, or is it one of the guys that we saw more of last year, whether Ty throughout the course of the year or Chris in the big critical moment when it mattered in the semifinals?
Yeah, that's why it's interesting that you say Chris at this point, because I guess at the end of last season he was the guy in the playoffs who came in, had a really good game. Emory does seem to have the most overall upside, and then Coach O also touched on today in his press conference that might just kind of be one of those play the hot hand type situations. If a guy is just feeling it that night, he's going to be his day. So we can see this thing swing, I feel like, every single week and have a different – what's good is you do have a lot of options. And so if you try throwing Emory out there and for whatever reason defense is reading it, eating it up, you have guys who can come in and give him a little bit of a different look. I do love the idea of having Davis Price and Emory kind of back and forth early in the game, and then just Chris Curry's running style, just have him kind of be that bruiser late in the game and just that downhill running, or really vice versa. You get him to – tire the defense out early, and then you switch it to a little bit of a faster guy with Bradford or Emory later in the game. They have a lot of options and stuff they can do. It'll be another fun group to watch, and a lot different than it was last year when it was pretty much it was Clyde's game, and they threw in Davis Price every now and then. We saw glimpses of Emory every now and then, but I mean it was Clyde's game, so this would be a whole different approach.
And I think it's going to be interesting too because of some of there's going to be some adjustments in terms of how much you can substitute guys during the course of some of these drives under these weird circumstances. The game day situation is just going to look different in a variety of little ways that will kind of be overlooked, and how that plays into the rotations at running back in particular for this team, I think, are very intriguing to me. I think the running back that's in the game at times this year in a weird year is an aspect of this that stands out to me maybe more than most other positions that we're going to talk about.
So I don't even know how we throw a number on these running backs if we don't know who's going to emerge. Do you think
anyone gets 1,000 yards? Any one of them? Do you think?
No.
Yeah.
No, I think honestly, I think it's going to be one of those that they might end up with I'm trying to just think of what number I want to say, 550, 470, 4. You know what I mean? They might all be within 100 to 200 yards of each other by the end of the year, just depending on how this all shakes out. It's hard for me to see one guy really take the reins and be a good notch above the rest. My gut just feels like they're going to all be pretty even, and I don't know if they're going to go drive by drive and give a guy that, or go quarter by quarter, or just because a lot of times one drive and the guy gets out of the game, you don't really get into a rhythm, get to read the defense. Maybe they give him a couple drives here. It'll be super interesting, but I don't think anybody hits 1,000, and I don't think personally that the one guy emerges well ahead of the other ones.
So where do you – I agree that I think probably we see them all relatively – the three – all relatively tightly packed by the end of the season in terms of where the numbers end up. Where do you put that range for those three, even if you don't necessarily know who leads it? Because I could see all three of them potentially going over 500.
That's kind of the ballpark that I have him in. Yeah, like 4 to 6, like 4 to 6 for each of them. And I don't at all feel confident on picking somebody to be like the leader. But for some reason, I just feel like Davis Price offers the most overall kind of versatility. He's a little bit bigger, so he has that goal line presence, but he's also got some speed to him, kind of deceptive speed for his size. Where I think, and I'm not again, I don't feel confident in this. I'm just giving you my general thoughts. Emory's got a little bit more of that shiftiness, and maybe in certain situations you want a little bit bigger body. And obviously with Curry's running style, there's that downhill bruiser. Not that he's slow by any means, but for some reason I just think Davis Price ends up being a little bit more versatile, a little bit more used in different situations. And so I'll put him as my leader and say, I guess in this 600 yards, 650 touchdowns is hard to gauge too. I don't know what they're going to do in the red zone. It's also apparently one of the things that Scott Linehan has been changing up in some of the red zone calls. So I'll say, just for past reference, Clyde had 16 touchdowns. David Price had 6 last year. 2 years ago, Brissett had 14. Clyde had 7. So I'll give Davis Price 10 touchdowns on the ground.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all pretty respectable. And again, I mean, we've hit on it repeatedly in this, but it's super difficult to forecast any of this. And I think the running backs in particular are going to be really difficult to forecast. I think the leader to me probably ends up being in that same sort of ballpark, 650 yardage wise and about 10 touchdowns. I think Ty is a great selection to possibly do that. I don't know, man. I could see Chris doing the same exact thing. So I don't know if I have to like really zero it in because I'll be wrong for sure. But
no, just follow your dreams. You want to commit to Chris, or do you think Ty as well, or do you think John, or do you think Trey? Whatever.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say about 650 yards and 10 touchdowns, and I'll say Chris just to be different. And again, we'll probably both be wrong, and somehow they'll go 5 wide all year, and we won't know anything.
I'm pretty sure you picked Chris Curry to be the leading rusher 2 years ago, and he added 60 yards to his name, something like that.
Yeah, and look, that I bought into. Give me Ty. Just because that year, no matter how much Nick told me, look, those young guys are great. It's my year. Like, don't listen to all the other stuff. I bought into all of the coach, the public hype, and said, you know what? O's been talking a lot about Chris Curry. I'm just going to say Chris Curry leads kind of a stable, and knew within 2 weeks I should have listened to Nick, who I've known since he was like 15 years old, telling me off record that he was going to have a big year. And so this year we've heard more about Chris from O to this point, but
time is a flat circle.
I watched Ty do it more consistently as the second guy to Clyde last year. I'll say Ty.
Okay, I like that. I like that rationale. The one thing that makes me think that your Chris hunch initially could have been correct is just because that Oklahoma game, but that's you just never know.
They talked about Chris that entire time that we were in Atlanta. They said Chris Curry, Chris Curry, Chris Curry, and finally I bought into it and said, you know what, it'd be Ty. Chris's name enough that I know that he's somebody that's really on Joe's mind, O's mind, et cetera, and it ended up being Chris Curry. So they keep you on your toes as always in Baton Rouge. As always.
Moving to receivers, these are some of the numbers that you touched on, a few of them, talking about Russell Gage's big year. That was actually just a casual Saturday for Jamar. So in 2019, LSU had 4 receivers with
I didn't throw Russ's name out though. I didn't say.
No, you didn't. I tossed him under the bus there.
I didn't say Russ's year was.
So in 2019, LSU had 4 receivers over 500 yards. They had 2 receivers over 1,500 yards, and they had 3 receivers with double-digit touchdowns. And in 2018, they had 1 receiver over 500 yards and 0 with double-digit touchdowns. So that was how big of a jump they were with that receiving core. So this group, we talked about it kind of at the start, some of the guys who are emerging. And I guess, Terrace is like the new leader of that group. And I feel like kind of the offseason motto has been like everyone's sleeping on Terrace Marshall. And I don't know if it's because he was injured part of the way last year. Maybe he's less of like I don't know if flashy is the right word, but he's kind of just like a quiet guy, keeps to himself and just goes and takes care of business. But for whatever reason, people keep sleeping on him. And I think he's going to have a hell of a year. And I'm also super pumped to see some of these younger dudes. Anything else you like to expand on these receivers, I guess, with Terrace in particular? Because I feel like we just kind of we don't keep overlooking him. We just mention him as like kind of that solid workhorse that's going to be kind of the leader of that group.
Yeah, I think Terrace is a far more special athlete than he gets credit for sometimes. I think he's an early round NFL guy, and we've seen him deal with some injuries coming out, and I think that's the biggest knock you can really have on him because he is so talented and was among the leaders of that receiving core last year early before running into the injury. He was catching touchdowns left and right, and I think it's going to be interesting this year because last year he was able to benefit from having Jets and Jamar take a lot of that attention away. People were going to look at those guys and figure out which one of them they could potentially take away before they necessarily game planned for Terrace. And I think with this offense, depending on how the early going of this season plays out, is Terrace kind of public enemy number one for opposing defenses that they're trying to figure out, or does it become Arik that early on? I think a lot of guys are going to have a chance similar to what we talked about with sort of hot hand or breakout game sort of thing from the running backs. I think we're going to see some games along the way this season that different receivers step up and kind of lead the way outside of just those two, where all of a sudden you're looking at Kayshawn has a great game, Racy has a great game, Jontre Kirkland I think at some point is going to have a game or two where he puts some big numbers up on a Saturday. And so I think at the end of the year you're looking at Terrace and Arik as the two leading receivers. I'm just interested to see how it kind of develops and what the mindset is for opposing defenses as more film comes out.
Damn, so you think there's a chance that LSU's second highest receiver could be Arik, numbers wise?
I think there's a chance that LSU's first highest receiver could potentially be Arik. I'm gonna stick with Terrace, but I think depending on how the defenses play LSU as the season develops, it's going to be really interesting because I think both of those guys are going to have really strong years on a very consistent basis.
It's so hard for me to like balance my level of hype for Arik Gilbert because I can't. You hear all these coaches talk about him week in and week out. You see the pictures of him from practice and scrimmages, and he looks like an absolute freak. But like, there's this. Everyone knows it. Every person who's from around Baton Rouge knows that this history of LSU and tight ends and not passing to him and all that stuff. And then you factor in he's a freshman coming in. So I have high expectations, but to hear you say that he could be at least pushing for the top spot among receivers or number two is incredible, especially for a young freshman tight end. This guy, if the hype must be real on this kid.
Yeah, he's a creative player. He's a guy that from the skill set that he brings and his combination of size and speed is Thad Moss had an LSU tight end record-setting performance last year, ended up with 47 balls that he caught for 570 yards and 4 touchdowns, despite missing a little bit of time there with some injury concerns. That was more in terms of receptions by one than Terrace had, obviously missing more time, but Terrace had more yardage downfield, more touchdowns because of that huge hot start. And I think Arik is potentially in play to compete with some of those Thad numbers on a short season. I think he ends up more touchdowns. I think he's potentially similar ballpark, probably exceeds the yardage numbers for me. 47 catches in 10 games is certainly plausible. So I could see Arik coming in as a true freshman and exceeding what was a record-setting season for an LSU tight end last year by a veteran who's now trying to make his way in the NFL.
He's got to be one of the most exciting players to come set your eyes on as a true freshman in a few years. So if you're going to go with
half the wide receivers on this team, and he's bigger.
Instead, they're going to make him learn tight end first before moving him out wide a little bit or the slot or something. But I wouldn't be surprised if that move comes a little bit earlier than they're hinting at. So if you're going to stick with Terrace as your leader, which I was probably going to do the same. So I was not going to put Arik second, but now you got me thinking. But I was going to. I think Terrace would emerge as the leader. What kind of stat line are you looking at for Terrace?
I think for Terrace, I look somewhere just north of 50 receptions, which is, a solid 10-game season theoretically. Jets was averaging almost 8 catches a game. Jamar a little bit shy of that. I don't know that we see Terrace catch 8 balls a game, but I could see him having games like that and ending up having his average be more like 6. And then yardage-wise, I think up toward 800 maybe, somewhere between 750 and 850. And
I was going to ask if you think he broke 1,000.
I don't think so. I think last year, as great as each individual receiver season was, that they benefited and the sum of those parts became that much better than they would have been if it was just Jamar without Jets and Terrace, or just Jets without Jamar and Terrace, or so on and so forth. And part of that, the sum of the parts piece, is you have a record-setting Heisman Trophy quarterback throwing it to all those guys too. And so I think with fewer truly elite right now pass-catching options, and without the same quarterback, and with 10 games instead of ultimately 15 games, it's going to be tough for Terrace to get to 1,000. I could see him, especially if things go well for these younger receivers, I could see him kind of getting up there and flirting with it. But if I had a bet, I'd say he ends up a little shy.
I think so too. I think he's going to be pushing it. The 50 catch mark seems about right. Like, it's with the amount LSU I think is going to be throwing again this year, not quite as many balls as last year, but still a very pass heavy team. I can see him averaging 5 balls a game pretty safely. I'll put him more towards 60 targets. I think they, as promising as some of these young guys are, I think there might be situations or games where they're going to just go to the trusty hand that they know they have, that little security blanket of Terrace. So I'll put him closer. I think his numbers might be a little bit higher, maybe 60 receptions, and I think he's going to be pushing 1,000, like 900 yards. I think in that ballpark.
Yeah, I'll say 55 for about 830 and maybe 12 touchdowns.
I was going to say 12 too. I'll go 13. I'll one up you.
Putting the prices right with Terrace Marshall stats.
Well, you win $1, Bob. And then I guess lastly, just kind of round out the offense is the O-line. We won't give numbers. I don't know what numbers you do for that. Sacks given up or something, but just overall thoughts. We touched on it again last week, so we don't have to go too deep into it. But the starting O-line for now seems to be Daryl Rosenthal, left tackle, Ed Ingram, left guard, Liam Shanahan at center, Chasen Hines, right guard, and Austin Deculus, right tackle, which to me seems like a pretty promising group. I think the two that I'm kind of circling are Dare and Liam Shanahan. You always worry about the quarterback center exchanges and a guy who, getting on the same page as Myles and learning the cadences and all that good stuff, and just the leader of the offensive line and kind of keep the whole group in one, in sync and reading these SEC defenses. But again, he's from Harvard, so he's got a brain on him for sure. And Daryl Rosenthal, just to see him transition to left tackle, I guess full time. He's kind of been there for a couple of years, but all the ability he possesses, and can he kind of lock down that that blind spot for the O-line. But I think overall the group is pretty promising. It's just one of those, stay healthy and learn to play together, and it's a cohesive unit. But I think it's got to feel pretty good about that group overall.
Yeah, I said, I think a little bit last week that in years past, as much as the spotlight is on the LSU quarterback every August or every offseason or every season as a whole, that you've been able to judge kind of as the offensive line goes, so goes the offense as a whole and the team as a whole, more than people necessarily give credit, where years that the offensive line is reliable are the years that LSU wins. And that's not shocking. We just don't talk about it as much as we talk about the quarterback. And so I think obviously a lot is on Myles' shoulders for this offense and this team. But to me, beyond that quarterback position, just knowing what I know and knowing my confidence in different positions and things like that, and who could be most pivotal, I think to me, Daryl Rosenthal is one of the biggest wild cards of this entire team, in terms of he could be one of the best players and be a part of this offense being really good, or if it doesn't turn out to be where we're thinking he probably is, because there has been a lot of optimism about him taking that step forward, then that could be problematic if they have trouble protecting that, that left side. It's such a huge position for them. And so I feel good. I feel good about the offensive line. I think they're going to be a good, reliable group if they're all there. We've seen them have issues in camp with COVID and a lot of guys missing, and that's going to be really difficult to deal with on an offensive line if you suddenly have a pack of your top guys are unavailable on a Saturday or for a couple Saturdays. But if you have this group, those starting five, the depth behind them to go forward through 10 games, I feel confident, and we'll see. A lot of wait and see, but I'm somewhat cautiously optimistic that it can be a really good group for LSU.
Do we know who the backup left tackle is? Is that?
It's a great question. I know when Austin was out earlier in camp, Cam Wire from EA was going in for him. I'm not positive who has been behind Dare on the other side, but they have a lot of offensive linemen. They have a lot of guys that they signed a big class a couple years ago, and a lot of those guys redshirted, and so they kind of have some options there. But shoot, they lost so much from. We talk about Sadiq and Lloyd and Damian, but they also lost Adrian McGee, Badar Traore, who played a role, kind of a versatile role up front. And so a lot of top veteran guys to replace in a group that they would love to be too deep at across the board.
Saw Lloyd Cushenberry getting that starting spot up in Denver. How about that?
Yeah, he and Ethan Posick, same day, named the starting centers in Denver and Seattle. So,
was that you tweeted center you?
Center you, man. Got Mawai, Niswanger up in KC, McClure, who took our old boss Marcus Carmouche's job in Baton Rouge, and then ended up being a great NFL offensive lineman for the Falcons. Ben Wilkerson had a couple years there in the NFL, was a great guy in Baton Rouge, and is now off coaching in the NFL. So they've had some pretty talented centers come through.
Start the propaganda, baby. Center you right here. So I think that wraps up. Where's my note right here? Yeah, I think that wraps up the offense, what we're doing this time. Next time we'll go through the defense and special teams before we're approaching game week here pretty shortly. And then we'll get into some more overall season breakdown stuff. But what? But I feel like you're about to say something.
Yeah, so I've been kind of trying to slyly check my phone a little bit because I got a message early on, and I'm trying to make sure no one else has put the news out yet. But we will have a new defensive player to talk about in that depth chart next week. That by the time this goes live, people should already know. That should be out there.
Oh boy. Well, that'll be exciting. We'll catch that all next week. Some defensive predictions. So I guess some special teams, Cade York predictions. And then overall season. So be sure to follow Jarrett on Twitter at Jarrett Roser. He'll be breaking this news to you here shortly, I guess, in the next hours to days. I'm on Twitter at Mark Clements225. Follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play Store, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review, give us a like, whatever you want to do. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.